So I'm nearing the end of my trip to northern France right now, and I thought I'd give a little bit of a retrospective. Um, because as I've gone throughout the different regions of northern France, I've noticed a lot of interesting things. Like, for instance, the thing about France is that what makes France interesting, in my opinion, is that it's kind of like Schrodinger's northern slash southern European country. Like, it's kind of both and neither at the same time. It occupies kind of this interesting in between category between northern and southern Europe. And I think in northern France it's even more apparent because southern France in some ways feels more straight up southern European, whereas northern France feels very much like a transitional area in that regard. And I even notice throughout the different parts of northern France I've been to, the degree to which like how northern, how southern it feels can vary from one region to another. Like for instance, right now I'm in Brittany, which is the peninsula in the northwest that kind of juts out westward into the Atlantic Ocean. It's a place where they're originally a Celtic people and they have a Celtic language. You actually sometimes see things here that are bilingual or trilingual with like French, English, and Breton. And you can see in the people like a lot of the phenotypes here do look like not that different from, say, the British Isles. Like, I would say here you see a fair amount of like blondes and redheads, like not to the point where they're the majority or anything like that, but I'd say more than even other parts of northern France. Whereas, for instance, conversely, like I was in the Loire Valley. Technically two different regions, like Centre, Val de Loire, and Pays de la Loire, or something like that. And yeah, in the Loire Valley area, I would say in the Loire Valley area, the people tend to be very predominantly like brown haired and some black haired. So it's interesting. You do see little variations in how the people look from one region to the other, which is quite common in Europe. And it shows how, like, in a lot of areas, you have people whose family have been there for generations and they don't just constantly move around from one place to the other like in Canada or the United States. Like in the US, for instance, there's some states where I believe the vast majority of the population weren't born in the state, and it's not just because of immigration, but it's also because of people moving around within the US. Like, say, Nevada, for instance, I think they might be the number one state for highest proportion of residents born out of state. So, like, my point is here it's a bit different from that. Although it's starting to change, I think it's starting to become more like North America in that regard, where people do move around more. But like historically, not so much. Like historically, a lot of people in Europe basically live in the same region where their ancestors lived for hundreds or potentially thousands of years. So yeah, you do get these like you notice these changes, like these subtle changes, subtle but still visible changes in like how the people look from like one region to the next, even in like a relatively small area. Whereas in North America, you don't to the same extent. You notice it a little bit. Like people tend to be really blonde around like North Dakota, for instance, or Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, like, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, like that whole region. But by and large, I would say in North America, there's less of a distinction in that sense. Now, obviously, I'm talking here when I'm talking about the phenotype. I'm talking about the native indigenous French people, which it's funny because somebody actually, I think, yeah, there was a case where somebody in France got legally in trouble. Like they actually got charged with hate speech for saying that there's no such thing as an indigenous black Celtic person or something like that. So it's funny how even talking about the concept of who's indigenous to this region is in and of itself apparently illegal, at least in France and potentially other European countries also. But yeah, whatever. I guess I'm breaking the law by talking about this right now. I mean, fuck, who knows? I'm probably breaking Canadian laws with some of the stuff I talk about too, but whatever. Breaking the law, breaking the law. But yeah, what's interesting is Paris seems to have its own distinct phenotype that's different from the rest of northern France, and I do think that's because of immigration. And I think Paris, it's a bit like Toronto and certain other major cities where immigration has changed it so much that like a significant portion of the population kind of exist in a bit of a gray area, shall we say, in terms of what ethno-racial group they occupy. And that's, again, in like, go to Latin America and it's like the majority of people fall into that. Whereas like in a city like, say, Toronto or Paris, it's a growing number, maybe not a majority yet, but like a growing number. And I would say in Paris, like, even like the white people in Paris look darker on average than other parts of northern France. And I think it's because probably there's been historically, potentially even before the 20th century, more migration to Paris from other parts of France and potentially other parts of Europe also. In addition to obviously the non-European immigration that has really taken off in the 20th century post World War II, although apparently some of it was happening pre-World War II in France also. Like if you look at like some of the German wartime propaganda about the French, like, and not just German but others too, like there was this, they're mocking the French even back then for like, having a lot of blacks in their country. And again, like a lot by the standards of their time back then was probably like 1%. I don't know, like again, like France doesn't have official racial statistics. I'm like, by law it's outlawed. I'm not sure if they had it then, but my point is like, okay, I've tried to find this information and I can't, like, how many, say, like black or non-European people existed in France prior to World War II. I would assume it was probably quite a small number compared to today, but perhaps larger than in other Western European countries even at the time. Because there were, as I said, like there were cartoons back then. Like if you look at these like old early 20th century cartoons, you have people like mocking the French for like there's one, I think a German one that had a bunch of black people looking at several white French people in a zoo, and it's like, this is the future of France. And that was a cartoon. I'm not sure if it was from the Nazi era or if it was from Imperial Germany, like under the Kaiser, or Weimar Germany. I don't know. It was a German cartoon from the early to mid 20th century. And I remember there's also an old cartoon that was like how the different countries colonize, and it depicted like the French as being like in love with the Africans who they were colonizing. And this was like from, I don't know, this was from probably, it was from the early 20th century. Like it was from when all these countries still had their colonies. I'm pretty sure like pre-World War II. I can try and find these old comics and link to them so you guys know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I guess my point is like, going back to what I was saying before, like Paris is, I'd say, fairly distinct from the rest of northern France in the sense that like it just seems very demographically different. Like I would say all of France seems to be going in that direction, just as all the Western world seems to be. But